Hi, I'm Jim Helsinger, Artistic Director here at Orlando Shakes, and it's my thrill to be your leader through our prologue of Henry IV Part 1. Everything you need to know in a quick 10-15 minute discussion to enjoy Henry IV Part 1. Henry IV Part 1 is part of our giant, massive Fire and Rain series, the largest series of productions we've ever done, Shakespeare's history plays of the entire 100 Years' War, which starts with the rise of Henry V. So last year, we did Richard II, who was king after his grandfather, Edward III, died. And then this year, you're about to see Henry IV Part 1, and then we'll do the Bear Bard in a few weeks of Henry IV Part 2, and then the reading of Henry V as part of UCF Celebrates the Arts. So all of that's this year, and then next year, we'll be doing the entirety of the Wars of the Roses, the second half of the Fire and Rain series, with Henry VI, the Red Rose, Edward IV, the White Rose, and Richard III, the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of the reign of the Tudors. So, to get you started, what's the story so far? Let's begin by looking back at what started the whole thing, the Fire and Rain series off. Last year, we presented Richard II. Okay, so the graphics I'm about to show you are all in our program, so you can open up your program and follow along as we go through the history here. Now, to begin with, Edward III, who was King of England, had 5 sons. The firstborn, Edward the Black Prince of Wales, Lionel, Duke of Clarence, John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, Edmund of York, and Thomas of Woodstock, the Duke of Gloucester. When Edward, the Black Prince, the firstborn son, died prematurely, quickly followed by his father, the king, the crown then passed over the uncles to Edward's only son, Richard II, at the age of 9. His uncles, Lancaster, York, and Gloucester, ruled the country as protectors until the king came of age. But Richard turned out to be a wasteful and petty king. He ordered the death of Woodstock, he banished Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, and when John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, died, Richard took all of his lands. So Bolingbroke came back, the son of the Duke of Lancaster, came back from banishment, seeking to claim back his ancestral lands, and he was aided by the lords of Northumberland and Worcester and the Percy family of the north. They're going to be really important in our play coming up. And Northumberland's son, Henry Percy, called Hotspur because of his huge temper, is going to be a big part of Henry IV Part 1, and he helped the overthrow of Richard II in Richard II. Bolingbroke succeeded. He threw Richard II into prison, where he was murdered, and Bolingbroke then became King Henry IV. That is what's happened so far in Richard II. Now let's start looking at our characters individually. If you go to your programs, Mia Gosling, who's a fantastic cartoon artist, has done a little presentation of each one of the main characters. Let's go through them one at a time and learn a little bit more about them. So looking at the graphic, first of all, King Henry IV is played by Jimmy Ireland in our production. He stole the crown from his cousin Richard II. He's a long-suffering father, distanced from his son Hal, and he's desperately trying to remain king and take down Mortimer, the rightful heir to the throne. We have Prince Hal, who is the oldest son of Henry IV and heir to the throne, played by Benjamin Bonifant in our production. And he's kind of a bad boy. He's drinking with Falstaff all the time, not being the best son, and he's slightly Machiavellian. He has a plan for how he's going to go from being a drunken wastrel to being the best king ever. Sir John Falstaff is Hal's absolutely immoral drinking buddy, played by Phil Nolan in our production, and he will do anything for a cup of sack, a kind of wine that was popular in England at the time. He takes all the money he's given by Hal to hire soldiers and wastes it. He spends almost nothing to hire a group of former criminals and thieves to go to battle instead, and he's very, very, very fat. And Hotspur, his real name is Harry Percy. He's the son to Northumberland. He helped King Henry overthrow Richard II, and now he's going to turn traitor and depose Henry to try to make Mortimer king. And he's very hot-headed, hence the name Hotspur. Northumberland is Hotspur's father. He helped overthrow Richard II, and he's not very reliable. He's going to abandon his son when it actually gets to the battle. Worcester, his real name is Thomas Percy. He's Northumberland's brother, Hotspur's uncle. He's a shrewd, sly manipulator that Henry banishes from the court, and he instigates the rebellion of Glendower and the Douglas. Owen Glendower is the Welsh rebel leader. Edmund Mortimer is the real heir to the throne, son of Lionel, Duke of Clarence. Lady Percy is the wife of Hotspur. She's very spunky and a good match for him. Mistress Quickly played by our own Anne Herring in our production, is the tavern hostess at the Boar's Head Tavern. Falstaff owes her a lot of money, and she talks a lot and says comical malapropisms where she puts the wrong word in the wrong place. And there's Ned Poins, who is another criminal and a friend of Hal's, and Bardolph, who is one of Falstaff's cronies, and he has a big red nose from drinking too much his whole life. And by the way, he appears in the most plays of anybody in Shakespeare. He's in 4 Shakespeare plays: Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, Henry V, and The Merry Wives of Windsor. That's the most any male character is in. The largest that a female character is in will be next year when we do Wars of the Roses, and that's Queen Margaret. So now let's move on to Henry IV Part 1, our play for tonight. Now this play begins a few years later, just after Mortimer has been fighting for the new King Henry and been captured by Owen Glendower of Wales. Meanwhile, on the northern border, Harry Percy, a guy named Hotspur, we just talked about him, has defeated a group of Scottish rebels and taken them prisoner. So our opening scene of Henry IV Part 1 is at the palace, where we learn that the Percy's aid to Henry before he became king, when they helped him become king, has never really materialized. He's not been treating the Percys particularly well, although they helped him become king. Hotspur has refused to hand over the Scottish prisoners that he just captured until Henry pays the ransom for Mortimer, who was captured in Wales. Now Mortimer is the brother of Kate Percy, Hotspur's wife, so Percy has a very strong interest in him being freed, but Henry refuses to pay that ransom because he has heard that Mortimer has turned traitor and wed a Welsh rebel, Glendower's daughter. Now, Henry also has another reason not to pay this ransom. Henry is a usurper. He took the crown from Richard II, and when Richard abdicated, Henry became the next to take the throne, and he's also a grandson of Edward III. But John of Gaunt was the 3rd son of Edward III. Lionel, Duke of Clarence, was the 2nd son. Therefore, his heir, Edmund Mortimer, has a better claim to the throne than Henry does, because Henry's born of the 3rd son, and Mortimer's born of the 2nd son. Richard II, who was killed, was born of the 1st son. So it should go 1st, 2nd, 3rd. But Henry jumped over that. So he doesn't really want Mortimer to do very well because Mortimer has a better claim to the throne than he was. No wonder King Henry doesn't really want to pay the ransom. So the Percys, shunned and scorned by the king, decide to join Mortimer and make him the next king. If they put Henry on the throne, they figure they can take him off again and put somebody else on the throne. Meanwhile, at the Boar's Head Tavern, where the lowlife hang out and drink, Prince Hal, Henry's oldest son and heir to the throne, is avoiding all battles by drinking and carousing with Falstaff and his band of criminals. Falstaff makes a plot to steal money from a group of pilgrim travelers, but that night, Hal and another thief named Poins play a trick on Falstaff, and they steal the money from the Falstaff, who stole the money from the travelers. So meanwhile, at the castle of Owen Glendower, the rebel, we meet Hotspur, his wife, his uncle Worcester, and they all form an alliance with the Scottish rebel Douglas to fight King Henry. When young Hal hears of this, he's forced to leave the comforts of the tavern for the battlefield. Hal promises his father that he will fight hard, and indeed he challenges Hotspur to single combat rather than both armies fighting, but that offer gets refused. Before the battle, Hotspur learns that his father, Northumberland, is sick and will not be joining the rebels. He also learns that Glendower has not arrived, so 2 of his strongest allies are gone. With a very reduced force, Hotspur and the Douglas join battle with King Henry's larger army. The battle's fierce, but eventually Hal meets with Hotspur and kills him in battle, although later Falstaff will claim credit, watch for this, for killing Hotspur. Henry IV wins the battle, and Part 1 ends with his promise to end the rebellion and bring down Mortimer, the other heir to the throne, who has escaped, and is the rightful heir to the crown, and all of his supporters. So, I hope you enjoyed our prologue of Henry IV Part 1. Please come back and see our Bear Bard production, 1 week only, of Henry IV Part 2, and then the reading of Henry V, which will be part of UCF Celebrates the Arts in April. And if you see all of those things, and you get your passport stamped, and you get all of them, you can see this is Richard II, the first one, and all 3 from this year. If you do all 3 of those, you get your dog tags that you can wear with the logo of Henry on one side, and it says, I saw the rise of Henry V on the others. You can get your mug, which celebrates the entire Fire and Rain series, and come back next year to see the entire Wars of the Roses. So there's lots of swag, lots of things to do. Enjoy Henry IV Part 1, come back to Henry IV Part 2, see Henry V, and you will see the entire rise of Henry V. The show will start in a few minutes, and I hope you enjoy it.